Okay, welcome to lesson 2 of Music Theory for Electronic Musicians. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the perfect fifth and working in keys. So let's dive right in. So when we left the last lesson, the last thing I told you was this little tip of stick to the white notes and you're cool. Stick to the black notes and you're cool. When you mix them up, you enter dangerous waters. In this lesson, we're going to look at why and how to get around that, how to navigate the dangerous waters of mixing up the white notes and the black notes. How do you know what notes work together? And that's the overall theme of this whole course is what notes sound good together. So in the previous lesson, we looked at the octave. The octave always sounds good. You can throw an octave on anything. You can write whole tunes just using octaves. We're going to look at another one now called the perfect fifth. Now, don't let the word perfect throw you. That's just kind of a terminology thing. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. But for now, let's just think of it as the fifth. The fifth note above the root. And we'll talk about that word root in just a second as well. So just like the octave, the fifth has a reason that it sounds good, or physical reason. And by physical, I mean grounded in physics. The octave was a 1-to-2 ratio that we looked at. So another way to see that would be if the fundamental is 1,000, the octave will be 2,000. Going down to the 2-to-3 ratio of the fifth, if the fundamental is 1,000, the fifth will be 1,000 times 2/3, which is 1.5, which is 1,500 hertz. So let's have a quick look at how to deal with that. And the reason I'm talking about these in hertz now, in a traditional music theory course, you would never talk about things in terms of hertz. But since this is electronic music, sometimes we have to dial in a synthesizer using just frequencies, hertz. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Okay, so let's demonstrate this thing called the perfect fifth that we're talking about. Let's hear it. So what I have here is Ableton Live, and I have an operator instrument. This is what it'll look like when you dial in a perfect fifth on your synthesizer if you're dealing with just oscillators. Normally we would play it in, we would play 2 notes, but if we want to look at it in the frequency standpoint, we could do it this way. So I have this bottom oscillator set to 1,000 or 1 kilohertz, which is 1,000 hertz. So just like my diagram before, 1,000 hertz. I have this one set to 1,500 hertz, right? So that should be a perfect fifth. And if I play it, we hear just those two. And that's the sound of a perfect fifth. It's a little piercing. That's why we call it a perfect fifth, because it's hard to explain, but it's got that perfect quality to it. Let's hear it a little bit lower. If I take this down to, let's say, 500, it's a little easier to hear. And then by our ratio from before, remembering the 2-to-3 ratio, the perfect fifth of 500 hertz should be 750. Let's hear that. Now we hear it again. So that is the sound of the perfect fifth. And it's right there. 500, 750, 2-to-3 ratio. Okay, so now let's deal with just finding the pitches. Finding the fifth on the piano roll editor. We're going to start on the root. I mentioned the root before. The root is just our starting pitch. It has a little bit more of a meaning that we'll talk about in a minute, but for now, just think of it as the note we start from. So we want to find, because we're talking about relative pitches here. So the root is the note we start on. If we want to find the fifth above that, we are finding the fifth of the root. So to find the fifth, we count up 5 notes. Not rocket science, right? It's a little more complicated than that, but let's start off with an easy one, counting up 5 notes, and for now, we're going to only use the white notes. So let's look at our piano roll here. Let's take a C. So here's my C on this line here, right? So if I count up 5 white notes, remember I'm skipping the darker shaded ones or the black notes on our keyboard. So we count C as 1. So this is 2, 3, 4, 5. This is our fifth. And this note is a G. G. So the fifth of C is G. So now you know when you're on a C and maybe you're throwing some octaves around and you want to liven it up a little bit more with more than octaves, you could use the fifth. The fifth is a safe bet. Throw in the fifth. Count up 5 notes and you get a G. Throw a G in there. Let's try another one. So how about D? We'll start here. This is a D. Remember the pattern of 2 black notes and white note in between. This is our D. So we start here. So this is 1. And we count up white notes. 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is an A. So 5 notes above D, or the fifth of D, is an A. Let's keep going. Here's an E. Let's start on an E. Counting up 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This note is a B. Remember, it's a B. A quick way to tell that this is a B is that it's right underneath the C. There's our C4, right underneath it. So that's a B. So the fifth of E is B. Whenever you're playing around on the note E, a B is going to be a great note to throw in there. Okay, a couple more. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every note ever, but we're going to run into a problem in a minute, so I want to point some of these out. So here we are on F. Here's an F. Here's one. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is a C. So the fifth of the fifth of F is C. Let's go up one more. Here's a G. Count up 5 notes, white notes only. A, B, C, D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We end up on a D. There's that pattern of the 2 black notes. So a fifth of G is a D. Almost there. Here's an A. Let's count up 5 notes. 1. And remember, we always include the first note when we're counting up 5. So A is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth of A is E. Make sense? Okay, now we run into a problem. Let's start on B. This is B because it's right underneath the C, right? There's the pattern of the 2 black ones. C is just underneath that, and our B is just underneath that. So here's B. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We end up on an F. Now this is curious because this note is not the fifth of B. It is if we just count up 5 white notes. However, unlike our other ones, this note has caused us a problem because we are not in the correct key for this to work. So in order for us to find the proper fifth of B, and what we're going to soon see is that it is not this note, but it is in fact this note. It's 1 half step higher. It gets us into a black note. To figure out why, we need to do a little bit of homework and look at keys. So we're going to put this all aside for just a minute, and we're going to switch over to talking about keys. Then we're going to come back, and why that note is in F sharp is going to make complete sense. Okay, off we go on to keys. Hold on to this B problem for a minute, and we'll come back to it. Okay, what does it mean to be in a key? The simplest way to think about it is that the key is home. The key is a single note, and it is the sound that makes it feel like the piece has ended. Or we just use this word, in music lingo, we talk about home, like your house, home, right? The key is what sounds like the place to stop. It feels the most comfortable. And it completely depends on the song, obviously. A song can be in any one of 12 keys or kind of more, depending on what you define as a key. For us, we're just going to focus on the 12 keys. So we can figure it out based on our ear. We can just hear it often. Once we know the key of the song, we can find all the notes that sound good. So the key is a way for us to know all of the notes that sound good, not just the octaves and not just the fifths, but find all of them at once. If we know what key we're in, we can very easily look at all the possible notes that will sound good. So finding out the key of your song is important when you're writing, right? Let's look at an example using Ableton Live real quick. Okay, so let's look at an example. Here is a simple little melody, and let's hear it, and let's just use our ear to figure out what key it's in. We don't need to know anything about what these notes are, just go with your gut. So first, let's just hear it. Okay, so here's our clue. What if we stopped on this note? I'm going to stop the melody this time right on this note, and then tell me how it sounds. Does it feel like it ends there? Does that feel like home, as we like to say? I'm making air quotes while I say the word home. No, it feels like one note away. When I play the next note, oh, well, let's play it from the top again. And home, right? Like it's that last note that makes it feel like the end. And you can see that I both started and ended on the same note, which is not always what melodies do, but it's a pretty good clue what key we're in when they start and end at the same note. So in this case, we're in C major because we ended on C and we started on C. But I just want to reiterate that it doesn't have to end on C. That's not why we're in C. I misspoke a little bit. We're in C because C sounds like home. Let's look at an example that does not end on C. Okay, here's another example. I've taken the same melody and reordered some of the notes a little bit so that it doesn't start or end on C. But I'm just going to tell you right away, we are still in C major. And here's how I know. Let's hear it. So I ended on G, as you can see here. And that's not great for the way it sounds. It sounds okay ending on G. G is a pretty stable one because in the key of C major, G is the fifth, which is what we were just talking about. But it would sound better still if I put a C at the end. Now, I don't have to. This is where the melody ends, and that's just fine. I'm the composer. I can do whatever I want. But listen to what happens if I play a C after the melody. It still feels like home more than G does. So I'm just going to put a C in there. Hear it again. So C still feels like home. Now that's great, but what if we don't want to just use our ear? What if we want a little more systematic way to find this? You might not be hearing this as what I'm calling home, and that's just fine. Sometimes it takes a while to develop that skill. Sometimes we all hear things differently, and that's just fine. So let's look at a little bit more systematic way of finding out what key we're in other than just using our ear. There is a pattern to a key, and it's really important to remember this pattern. If you ever want to find the notes that sound good, this pattern is key, and here it is. That was a pun, right? This pattern is key to get the key. Get it? Never mind. Okay. This is what it looks like. W, W, H, W, 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 H. What that means is W is a whole step, and H is a half step. So a whole step is two adjacent notes, and now we're including the black notes. Okay, so two notes right next to each other. If we jump up two notes, we've jumped up one whole step. Half step is just a single note. It's going to the next possible closest note that we can go. So whole steps and half steps. So the pattern for a key is whole step, half step, whole step, half step, right? So if we were in the key of C major, which is what we've been working on this whole time, this will end up being all white notes. This will end up being C. We go up a whole step, so that's 2 half steps. We would skip over C sharp or D flat, and we'd end up at D. That's a whole step. Let's look at the piano roll editor to make this a little easier to see. There we are. Okay. So I'm just going to write our pattern here. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step. All right. So keep that in mind. That's our pattern. So let's start on C, right? So looking at our piano roll editor in our grid here, here's our C. So we go up a whole step. So we skip over that one. That's C sharp. Skip over that. So this is the next note in key. Next thing we need is another whole step. So we go another whole step. And this is another note in key. And let's put a little dot on C. So I'm going to put a dot on all the notes that are in key. Now we have a half step, right? Only one adjacent note. So there's no note here we can skip over. So we just go up a half step, which is our next note. So that's here. That's that half step. Now we need another whole step to get here. Oh, I forgot to put a dot here. Now we need another whole step. So I skip over the dark one. Now I need another whole step. I skip over the dark one. And then we end with a half step. And we end up there. So what does that get us? Since we started on C, C is our root. There's that word root again. We started on C, so that got us, just coincidentally, all the white notes, including an octave. So we started on C here, and we ended on C here. Oops. My pen just went crazy there. So that got us a full octave using this pattern, whole, half, whole, half. Now we're looking at a major key here. We may also have minor keys. We'll talk about those later, but just for now, file away that we're just going to be talking about major keys for a little bit. If that doesn't make any sense, don't worry about it. Let's look at another one. So let me clear my screen here. So remember the pattern, whole, half, whole, half. Let's start on D this time. So here's D. We go up a whole step. And then, so we have whole step, another whole step. This is only a half step here. So my whole step ends up here. Now I'm on an F sharp. That's what that note is. F sharp is here. So I've gone up one whole step, another whole step. Next on my list is half step. So now I'm half step. I'm back to a white key. I'm on a G. So the notes of D major, which is what we're looking at here, are this so far. So I have this black note here. So now I'm including the black notes, but in a way that's going to sound good. So now I need another whole step. Another whole step. Another whole step. So I'm on another black note. This is C sharp here, this black note. And then a half step. If you do this right, you will start and end on the same note. So I started and ended on D. And I just used that pattern. Whole step, got me to F sharp, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Make sense? Cool. Moving on. So now that we have this pattern down, we actually have learned something else as well, the major scale. You've probably heard of major scale. If you've ever taken a piano lesson in your life, you know what a scale is, or a guitar lesson maybe even. All the major scale is all the notes in the key played in order, right? So we know what all the notes in the key are because we know that pattern, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. That's our pattern. You get really good at reciting that. Playing the scale is just to play all those notes in a row. So let's look at our diagram one more time. And let's figure out, let's do a different one. Let's do E major. No, let's do F major. So here's our F. There's our F. So here's our first note. So whole step. Whole step here. And then whole step to here. And then half step gets us to this note, which we could call a B flat, or we could call it an A sharp. In this case, we should call it a B flat, but that's a story for another day. Then we have whole step. We can connect these if we want. Whole step and half step. So those are all our notes in the key of F major to be specific. So if we wanted to play the scale, we would play this one. We would just play those notes that work in that key. Those are the notes that work in F major. That's all we need to know to understand the key and the scale, is just that pattern. So in the key of F, we have one black note here, and it's this one. It's a B flat. More on that soon. Okay, back to our problem with B. If you remember, when we counted up 5 notes from B, we ended at F, and this is wrong. This is 5 notes up from B, but it's in the wrong key. What we really want is F sharp, and the way that we know that F is wrong is that this pattern of whole step, half step, etc., isn't followed. Let's look at it one more time, starting on B. So I'm going to start down here. So here's a B. So B. If we go up a whole step, we end up here. If we go up another whole step, we end up here. If we go up a half step, we end up here. And then a whole step, a whole step, a whole step, and a half step. So this is B also. So there's our pattern. These are our notes in the key of B. Now let's count up a fifth. Remember, when we count up a fifth, we want a fifth of the notes in the key. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a black note. If we just counted in C major, we ended up on F. We ended up on this one. But the correct answer would be this one. This particular note, F, when we're in the key of B and we're trying to find the fifth of B, is going to be one of the worst notes we could play. So you really don't want to make this mistake. This is called a tritone. My handwriting is pretty sloppy with this tool, but a tritone is bad. It's not going to sound good no matter what you do. A fifth sounds great, always, almost always, but a tritone sounds terrible. You really don't want to make that mistake. Trust me. Okay, so we solved the problem with B, right? We found out that it isn't an F, it's an F sharp, because using the pattern, that gets us to an F sharp. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, jump back and go through the whole step, half step stuff again, because it's going to be very important. Okay, so why do we care about this business of the fifth at all? Two main reasons. One is that it almost always sounds good, just like the octave. I can think of a couple situations where the fifth isn't going to be the most perfect note to play, but really 99% of the time, if you throw a fifth into something, it's going to sound good. Especially if you're doing a pad or a synth riff, a melody, something like that. Sometimes when you're making a chord, if you're doing some complicated stuff, the fifth isn't what you want, but almost always the fifth will sound great. Second reason is when we start to make chords, for the basics of the chords that we're going to do in an upcoming lesson, the fifth is really important. We need the fifth in order to make a chord. It's might not even be considered a chord without the fifth. So we have to be really aware of where our fifth is and how to use it. Also, for fifths, bass lines. Bass lines, you want to use your fifth in bass lines. If you're sick of just playing octaves, drop some fifths in there and you've got some sweet sounding bass lines right away. All right, let's hear some examples and let's get used to hearing fifths. Off we go. Strauss. Now, I know this is, but I can't, I would be a failure as a musician if I didn't use this piece to talk about the perfect fifth, at least briefly. We're not going to talk about classical music very much here, but All Sprach Zarathustra, which means thus spoke Zarathustra, has this huge thing. You've heard this a million times before. Elvis used to walk out on stage to this tune. I know you've heard this, so let's just listen for a minute. So the reason I'm pointing this out is, as you may have guessed, those trumpet notes beginning are a fifth. Just a fifth and an octave in order. It's going C, G, which is the fifth of C, and then a C again. And then he's playing E, D sharp. So if you're on your toes, you might notice D sharp is not in the key of C, and you would be correct. We don't always play notes. Every note doesn't have to be in key. They actually get kind of interesting when they're out of key. And that's why this note sounds really strange, because it's out of key, so it gives it a little more character. So those notes just going up, really simply, there's our fifth. Here's a fifth of that to C again. And then there's that. So All Sprach Zarathustra. You've probably heard this sound before, whether you know it or not. That's because stringed instruments, not guitars, but stringed instruments like violins, cellos, and things, are tuned to fifths. So this is a fifth. These are all fifths. So G to D is a fifth. D to A is a fifth. And A to E is a fifth. So this sound those are all fifths played on top of each other. So fifths especially sound good in strings because they're designed to play them very, very efficiently. Okay, here's another example. This is just a little ditty I put together. What I've done here is make two kind of chords. I have a D, and then I have a fifth of D, an A, and then I put another D on top, an octave, right? So we know what octaves are. D and D are octaves, and A is the fifth. And then halfway through, I switch to an F, and a fifth of F, and another F. Then I put an arpeggiator on it. So I set the arpeggiator to play 16th notes and to play down, up, 16th notes, and that's it. So it's going to play through those notes one at a time. This is going to result in something that is not immediately, it does not immediately sound like the coolest groove you've ever heard. It's just going to go do-do-do-do-do-do-do. But it sounds like this. So this is just cycling through root, fifth, octave, and then back down. So root, fifth, octave, root, fifth, octave, fifth, root, fifth, octave, fifth. But much faster than I could speak. But this can end up being an actually kind of really cool groove. Let's add some drums. All right, this has been Music Theory for Electronic Musicians, Lesson 2, The Perfect Fifth, and Working in Keys for Slam Academy. I am J. Anthony Allen, and I hope to see you in the next lesson. Adios.